Have you ever been called too nice by people? I know a lot of people on this channel love the nice video and they have asked me so many questions about niceness. And guess what? I have a very special episode for you. Today, I will be interviewing Dr. Aziz Ghazipura, who's the best selling author of Not Nice, The Art of Extraordinary Confidence, On My Own Side, and other amazing books. Dr. Aziz is the authoritative voice on niceness. He's able to talk about niceness in a very detailed, nuanced, and intuitive way so that we can all understand what niceness is, what it is not, and how does it differ from kindness. You know, a lot of nice people just end up in this trap of thinking that it's the same as kindness, and there's a lot of confusion there. And as a result, we end up suffering not just emotionally, and you'll see Dr. Aziz make this point, but also physically. A lot of symptoms of niceness don't just stay in the emotional realm. They end up affecting our bodies, there's tightness in our body, and it might eventually lead to back pain and things like that. And we go deep into these things in this episode. So we will go into why it is so difficult to say no. We will go into the nuances between niceness and kindness. We'll go into some of the physical symptoms that one might experience if one is too nice throughout their lives, and many other topics like confidence and assertiveness and so on and so forth. It's a complete treat to have Dr. Aziz with us and explain these concepts in such beautiful detail. On a personal note, I have been lucky to call Dr. Aziz my mentor for the last few years, and he has been exceptional in helping me understand my own blocks around confidence. One reason I'm able to record these videos at such level of confidence, if you think that is true, and such level of ease and such level of consistency is because Dr. Aziz has been such an amazing mentor in teaching me how to express myself in the best possible way, and while at the same time staying grounded and not hunting for validation, and just staying composed. So he has been an absolute positive and critical influence in helping me develop my own confidence and reducing my niceness, while at the same time reducing people pleasing and increasing my ability to do good for the world. Before we continue, if you're listening to this and if this interview adds any value to your life, and if you'd like me to do more of these, then I would highly appreciate if you subscribe to this channel. It really helps me a lot. It helps me get people like Dr. Aziz on the show who are here to spread their intelligence and their knowledge to this world. So it would really help a lot. Right now, 83% of you who watch this channel are not subscribed. So if it would mean the world to me if you hit the subscribe button. Now on to the interview. So without further ado, I don't want to spend too much time in the intro. I present to you Dr. Aziz Ghazipura. Hey, Dr. Aziz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Songkop. I am super excited to be here.
Right. So I did a bit of a survey, did a little bit of know the pulse of what the audience wants to hear. And overwhelmingly, the only response is niceness. Like, tell us how to be not nice. And so I have a very simple question to start with, which may or may not have a simple answer, which is, why is it so difficult to say no?
Yeah. Or even your audience is saying, how do we be less nice?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so difficult?
Yeah.
So I think that's great to get into. Why is it so hard to say no? I'd say two big reasons come to mind. One is we don't want to cause others pain or upset others. And no is generally not the response that the other person is going for when they ask you for something. They want a yes, just like we do. And so if I give them a no, I might disappoint them, which is going to hurt them, we fear, or it's going to upset them. And I am afraid of those two things. So I'm going to say yes. That's number one. And the second reason is we don't have permission to say no. We learned that saying no is somehow selfish or wrong, or we're not being a good person. And so we have to say yes to be good. And I think those two things come together, and That's why most people say yes when they want to or need to say no.
Yeah. So I study psychology, and a lot of times in the psychology circles, the explanation has a lot to do with like your conditioning or your past. So to what extent is this idea of niceness? And I'm gonna drill a bit into that, but just on this idea of it comes from your past. What do you have to say on that?
I would say that yes. Much of that fear of upsetting others or saying no, making you bad or wrong, is a result of your learning of the whole construct of a good person is what we learned growing up from our cultural field. I think humans are hardwired to want to fit in and be good and liked and succeed by being good and liked. So I think that's hardwired, but what makes you good or bad, what makes you liked, what is valued by your culture or your society varies greatly. So your family and the culture that they were embedded in can have a major influence on kind of teaching you what those things are that make you good or bad. And so I'd say a big part of that is the conditioning.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's done, I think, well, a lot of it's well-intentioned, probably. The parent is like, well, I want my kid to be a good member of society and obedient and nice and friendly and kind. And they don't necessarily think about the downstream effects of how are you teaching that? Are you also balancing that with autonomy or authenticity, which can be very different? And if you don't think about that kind of stuff, then you might just set up you set up a pleaser for life.
Yeah. 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 It sounds like there is it sounds like there are two levels of explanation here. One is that yes, you can go back, you can like find out what things, how you came to be certain way. In this case, nice. But it also sounds like you can explain it within the present moment, so to speak. That like a fear of rejection right now, and so does that
Yes.
sound like what it is?
100%. I love that breakdown. And the liberation, the freedom is now. Like to change any of this is now.
Yeah.
Learning from the past, I think gives you insight. And if anything, it can just help you realize that it's a learned pattern.
Yeah.
It's messages and information that you got when you were young that therefore doesn't have to be the information that you choose to live by now and forever. So I think that's the liberation of going to the past. But the actual change is going to occur right now, because unlikely anyone listening to this probably is having a parent follow them around and say, share your toys, Jimmy, because we're a grown up, we're adult to some degree, and parents aren't there. But we've internalized that, and so it's you and you. And I see this with clients all the time, like, yeah, but other people would think this, and my family would think that. But when you are by far the largest enforcer of the cultural field on yourself, and that when you change that and you give yourself more permission, you might have some bumps in the road, some conflicts about it, but also there's huge portions of the population in the world that don't react at all. They're like, oh, you said no, okay, fine. But you that's all theoretical until you really practice now to change that and see what really happens.
Yeah. You said something that is common jargon between us, and I know that, but it may not be clear to everyone, which is the cultural field. So could you just talk a bit about what the cultural field is?
Yeah, I heard that term first from a teacher named Donnie Epstein, and I liked that because it I think captures the nature of this. A field is an invisible force of energy, like magnetic field, gravitational field, cellular signal field. We're embedded in and affected by those fields, even though we don't necessarily see them. But it doesn't matter if you believe in gravity or see it. Just jump off a building and see what happens. So it's the same thing with the cultural field. It's an invisible force that is very much influencing every single one of us right now. It affected what we wear to this interview, and why I'm not shirtless or something like that, right? There's some invisible force that's controlling that. And it's not all bad. It's not bad or good. It just is. And it has different effects. Just like if you got a lot of a certain type of electromagnetic field, it could damage your body. But a certain other small amount does nothing to you, or it even can enhance your health and cells and your mitochondria and all that. So the cultural field is not good or bad. It's a force, and it's made up of the humans around you, the culture that you're in, but also your unique learning in your family and which you grew up in about how you see it and what the rules are. And so put simply, that field is controlling what you see as good and bad, right and wrong, proper and improper, which makes you a good or a bad person, good or a bad son, good or a bad daughter, husband, friend, teacher, boss, employee. And so most people are very completely kind of controlled by that field and don't even know that they're in it. Just like, a thousand years ago, people probably didn't have the understanding that they're being affected by an electromagnetic field, but they are. And the same thing is true for many people now with the cultural field. They're living it out, and then they carry it out, right? So the parent is like, you got to be this way and that way and this way, and they don't even know why they have to enforce all that on the kid. It just feels freaky and scary if they don't.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, so to just like combine the two questions I asked, somehow this idea of being assertive or the ability to say no or not nice, as you would say it, somehow that has escaped the education of the cultural field, right? The education system of the cultural field. So you would get even people who are PhDs and professors and, at very high ranks in government, academia, who still struggle with being not nice or saying no. So what is your sense of why have we not identified this as a problem, and why does this message resonate so well when we start talking about not nice? What is it that we are tapping, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the reason it's so resonant is because it's the elephant in the room that everyone's feeling, but not necessarily speaking about.
Yeah.
Just like if you're hanging out with somebody and there's a tension there's a conflict, you're upset about something and no one's speaking about it, it's really uncomfortable. And as soon as someone says like, hey, that fight we had the other night, I'm still thinking about it. And you're like, oh, me too.
Yeah.
And then there's a relief there. So I think that response from people is a relief of like, oh, yeah, I'm feeling that. Others are feeling that. And what's that? It's the suppression, the oppression of being in that cage of this is how you're supposed to be. And why is that not more known in, education? And I would say that that's just one of many key aspects of human psychology and optimal functioning, optimal living that are not covered in education. I don't see education as providing that much in many ways at all. So emotional intelligence, what are your emotions? How do you experience emotions? How do you regulate emotions? How do you communicate those effectively with others? Your mindset, how do you work with fear and doubt? What kind of perception do you have of yourself? How do you build an improved identity? But none of that is part of education.
Yeah.
And so people are going to learn that either from their family or not. Or as they get older, and probably your audience is, it's like they get into something called personal growth or self-development or whatever, or whatever you want to call it. And they're like, oh man, that's all the stuff they don't teach me in school.
Yeah.
And I feel like that doesn't change whether you go to higher level, university, further education, and ironically, even in further education of something like psychology, they're still not necessarily covering that. And in fact, at least in my background in the clinical psychology world, the therapy field, it is even more often within the cage of niceness. And we could get into more of why I think that is, but so it's definitely not a given that
Yeah.
education equals optimal living,
Hmm.
and learning about that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I would like to get into it a little bit, which is I think if some person next to me decides or realizes that they are too nice and they need some help, the first person they would probably go to would be a therapist, like a standard clinical psychologist. And what you're saying is perhaps that is not part of the education in the um, clinical psychology area. So, how do you I guess it's two part, like why, first of all, because it does sound like a common psychological problem, and then second, where where does this person go, like, do they read self-help books, do they find coaches, how does it work?
Yeah. Uh, well, to clarify, I do think that a lot of therapists could help someone with people
Mm-hmm.
pleasing, poor boundaries, not saying no,
Yeah.
not knowing what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of therapists that would not. And that's because the effectiveness of someone to help someone as a therapist or any other profession,
Yeah.
title is limited by by the helper's growth themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So less important than the title. Is it a psychologist or a licensed professional counselor or whatever the labels are in the UK and the US,
Mm-hmm.
and licensed clinical social worker? I mean, there's so many different ways that create qualifications to be able to help people, or a coach. Uh, it, I think it's less important. The tools that they have do matter, but a lot of people have access to the same learning and tools.
Mm-hmm.
But what's going to make the difference between a really profound experience
Mm-hmm.
that really life changes for the person, the person who's seeking the help, or just like, oh, it felt good to talk to somebody. Whew, we get that hit
Mm-hmm.
of relief, but things don't radically change. The difference, I think, is all comes back to the who's doing it and how far have they expanded and challenged and questioned, and how much are they living their own,
Yeah.
writing the script on their own life.
Yeah.
Because you can't take someone farther than you've gone, is my
Yeah.
belief. And so one of the mentors that I worked with and learned a lot from, he was a licensed clinical social worker, but he was in his 60s when I worked with him,
Sure.
and he'd been going to personal growth stuff and learning and trainings,
Mm.
and both professional and personal, for 40 some years. And I was like,
Mm.
this guy is you talk to him and there's such like this energy and vitality in their eyes and the way they speak. And it's just, so much is transmitted in that, and so much they can ask you
Yeah.
questions, and they don't subtly steer you away from something.
Mm.
And I think that's the problem that I saw in a lot of training and clinical psychology, is that a lot of them are, very intelligent. They're very driven, maybe a lot of type A in there,
Mm.
and uh, but maybe a little bit of arrogance
Mm.
I saw there,
Sure.
of like, yeah, I'm going to do some things, but not this, like, I had this sort of, I think, humble, like, I'm messed up. I need help.
Sure.
That's what led me to the field
Mm.
anyway. And the people that are like that, the sort of the wounded healer
Mm.
idea, who really take on as a lifestyle. I want to grow. I want to constantly grow, become the most powerful helpers, I think.
I see. I see. Yeah. Speaking of which, I'm sure you were born like perfectly assertive, and you could say no, just
Right.
so,
Yeah. Out of the
yeah,
womb.
just expert on day one. So
Yeah.
so I guess my question is, if that is not the case, what drew you to this area, or how did you end up being an expert at that, and writing a book and now coaching several people? What was that journey like? How were you nice, and then do you have any like examples when you were not nice, and could you paint a picture of that journey?
Yeah. I think the whole time my experience has been, I am drawn to learn something because I'm suffering.
Mm.
I'm in some sort of limitation or cage. And I lived in that, I'd say, for about a decade, especially with pretty severe social anxiety. and then discovering, oh, wait a minute, this is not a permanent life sentence. This is something I can change. And that being so profoundly exciting and liberating and energizing and challenging to do. But wow, on the other side of that, I just remember feeling this euphoria, not just of the experience of, say, being able to date a woman that I loved, which I'd never been able to date at all before that, or share in front of with a group of people and have people laughing at what I was saying. Those experiences were really, really amazing, but nothing compared to that sense of liberation of like, wait a minute, you can do more than that voice of fear and doubt says. And it's I'm sure people listening have had experience. So when you're on the other side of that story of I can't and it's impossible, and you do have that experience, it's intoxicating. And so I just became fascinated in that. And to this day, I still seek that out. What is it my mind says is impossible? And let's go towards that and see what's there. And so it started out sort of a basic necessity of social life, right, and connection, but then very soon I realized, as soon as I was experiencing that liberation, I wanted people around me to feel that too. So if I talked to somebody who seemed really stuck, I'd be like, oh, you got to check this out and do this and try that. And so I had several friends that some of them were not open to it, but some of them were. And it became really energizing to realize like, oh, I can turn around and share this stuff as I'm learning it. And I think that led me to want to pursue a degree in clinical psychology well, then I can officially do that with people. And along the way, though, I mean, there was a period of discovering around social anxiety and shifting that. But I got to this limiting point where I could date and have friends and speak up in groups and look very confident. But as soon as I really started to date somebody, I would just become a hot mess. All these nice patterns, which I didn't even know were there, would come out of the woodwork and make me pretty dysfunctional in relationships. I would want to exalt her and help her feel like she was the most special person in the world. I never want her to feel rejected. So I would put up a false front, right? Like basically like, I'm so in love with you. You're so amazing. Even though I might not actually feel that, or else, yeah, I want to spend all my time with you, but I might not want to feel that. And, a lot of chronic physical health problems as a result of this false way of being in the world, which is a whole nother rabbit hole of a conversation we could go down if you wanted. But and then at some point the way I shifted from stuck in social anxiety to free was not some feat of my own creative powers and brilliance. It was just like, I need help. So I found teachers online and studied and learned. And so there was another level of needing that with the niceness. And so I got into a group, a men's group, actually. That was led by that 60-year-old gentleman I talked about earlier. And it was very early on, the very first conversation I had with me. He's like, oh, you seem like a really nice guy. And I was like, oh, thank you. And he's like, actually, that might not be as good as you think. Here, there's a lot of nice guys in my groups. And you should read this book. And it was by Dr. Robert Glover, No More Mr. Nice Guy. And I just very much saw myself in that book. And I was like, oh. So then I learned some very basic new skills that, it's like being able to have boundaries, which start with, well, what do I want? And that bumped into all my selfishness and all, as in a fear of being selfish. And ultimately, and there's a lot of fear of challenging these things. And so through the support of that group, being able to say when I was angry or upset, which sounds so basic, but it was like a phobic level of terror in me to do that kind of stuff, like sweating and so I would actually practice that stuff and eventually realize, it's not the end of the world. I can do this. And lo and behold, all of a sudden I was able to have a more healthy relationship because I could say, hey, when you do that, I don't like that, or it hurts my feelings when you do this, or I could say these things that are very basic now to me that were totally off limits before. And I learned about the role I would play of like boyfriend, which was very limiting, which would make me feel very trapped. And so I'd want to escape, which is the pattern I would run. Date, trapped, escape, date, trapped, escape. So I was able to break that and have basic conversations and express disappointment or something I didn't like, or just simply say what I want. Hey, I want this, I want that, I don't want that, and be able to talk about things, whether it was spending time together or in the bedroom or all everywhere in relationships. And of course that spread to all other relationships too, beside romantic.
Sure.
And then similarly to the social anxiety, as soon as I started to grow in that area, I was like, oh wow, there are all these nice people around me in the world. Like we need more people need to know about this too. So then there's a turning around and sharing everything that I'm learning and using that to help, with Operation Mass Liberation.
Yeah. And I've certainly been a recipient of that sharing. So thanks for putting your wisdom in the world.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure.
Yeah. There's so much in what you said about your story and how you sort of came to the other side. And what I suspect for people listening is they would identify with your past self. And I do know a lot of listeners are in perhaps that age range, but maybe in just that situation of life, regardless of their age, which is they are perhaps feeling a little lonely. I study social neuroscience, and there are two things that I know. One is that relationships matter a lot for our happiness. And the second thing is there is a rise in loneliness, and they seem incompatible to me. And, that's like the global statistics kind of thing. But then, there are friends that I have who are really upset about not being able to go out and meet a date or go out and meet friends. And so if you were to speak to that person listening right now, what would be some either just like words of solace or perhaps even some practical tips would you give to that person?
Yeah. I mean, first I'd say you are one pathetic loser, man. I tease, that's what I felt like. Honestly, when I felt like a loser.
Yeah.
And what that means, if you don't necessarily use that word about yourself, but it just means you feel inferior. You feel, oh, I don't have the friends because ... I'm not worthy of the friends, or that person's better than me, or I'm not as interesting, or all these things come together to create this identity of someone who isn't that desirable. Why wouldn't someone just choose someone else, especially in this day and age where they could just open an app and look, there's a prettier person, a smarter person, a better person than me. And the reason I'm starting there is because that's the biggest source of pain. And that is the biggest reason that we don't have more connection. And I get it. It's hard because when you're in it, it feels really, really true.
Yeah.
And so if someone said, no, you got stuff going for you, you're great, you could totally, someone would really want to be your friend, and just don't buy it. It just doesn't feel real. And so I think that's the solace, is just truth of that's what it feels like. That's what it seems like. And that's also the seed of the freedom, is that it is as true as it feels. Fortunately, something else is also more true. And that's kind of the inside job trick of confidence. Whereas if you see yourself as inadequate in all these ways, then you will experience more being ignored and overlooked and more loneliness, because you won't take the risks. You're certain you're going to get rejected. And also you put out little subtle signals behaviorally, energetically, that keep people away.
Yeah.
And on the other side of it, if you see yourself as bringing value, as attractive, as lovable, and I'm not saying you jump through 75 hoops to get all the money and the abs and all this stuff, and then I'm saying, like, if you could flip a switch in your mind, just as you look, just as you are, just as your life circumstances, if we could do that, flip a switch in your mind where all of a sudden though you took a magic elixir. And you're like, actually, I'm pretty good, Oh, I'm pretty funny, I'm pretty interesting. And then you went out in the world like that, you would develop friendships and romantic relationships like very quickly, rapidly. Within weeks or months, you could have a big shift in all this stuff. And the the whole game of it then is like, well, how do you make that mental shift? And that's what I've been obsessed with studying with people and observing, and what accelerates that.
Yeah.
Because then once they do that and they get into the world and start taking more action, just like you have a whole different world of that you live in as a result.
Yeah. And like I was just picking on, I think what you're highlighting there is there's a lot of self-hate going on. So behind all of these statistics and the numbers, what the experience is for people is a little bit of self-attack, a little bit of self-sabotage, and some inaction for good measure. And that sounds like a recipe.
A little recipe right there.
Yeah.
Worst cookies ever.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, you have written a book called On My Own Side. So I've always thought of it as self-compassion, also partially coming from the psychology literature. But I really like your phrasing there. So could you tell me a bit more about what being on my own side is?
Yeah. I love self-compassion too. Actually, I wrote my dissertation on self-compassion again because of my interest in studying what would help me that I could then also turn and help others.
Sure.
So I had such a issue with self-hatred. And I expanded it to be on my own side, in that compassion may be a word that people use, but its origins, I think, in a lot of ways were in Buddhism, and then it kind of came over into Western psychology, and so it's might not be the most common word. So if you were talking to like a teenager and say, hey, you got to have more compassion for yourself, they'd be like, what? and so, but I think we get, hey, do you have so-and-so's back? Are you on their side? And we get that. And it also captures, though, that to be on someone's side, and this could be for better or worse, they don't have to be right. And so if your friend comes to you and they're like, man, my girlfriend said this to me and that, and you might kind of know that there's probably more to the picture. Your friend might be distorting it a little bit. He's going to portray it as he's the good guy and she's the bad guy, but you're on his side. And that doesn't mean you're like, yeah, she's terrible, leave her. You're just kind of, you hear him like, oh man, that's tough. Or, oh, that sucks when she does that. Or you're, and there's compassion in there, but there's also a loyalty that I wanted to capture with that term. And that's the part that I think is the most powerful aspect of on my own side, is this commitment to loyalty to yourself. And that doesn't mean that you stand by everything I said and did was right. It just means, hey, when I'm hurting, this is what you say to yourself, like, Aziz, when you're hurting, I'm with you. I'm not going anywhere. That's like the baseline foundation. But it's also not the end of the story. We want to go further and say, and I want to know who you are and love who you are and ultimately celebrate who you are. So there's it's almost like, if you get to a certain level of fitness, you can then go higher. So let's say you stop eating the junk food, stop eating the soda and McDonald's and stuff. That's great, but you're not, there's another level of health where maybe you're active and you're exercising and you're eating really well. And I feel like that once we get that foundation of not just tearing ourselves to shreds, then we can actually get into a level of, well, can you really acknowledge yourself today?
Yeah.
You're like, wow, that was great. I love who I am. I think that was amazing what I did there. And it, for people who lived their lives in a lot of self-hatred, and me being one of those people, it can feel a little wrong. Just like being less nice and more assertive and authentic can feel a little wrong at first.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. Being on your own side, really, especially at those higher levels, can almost feel a little arrogant.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, I'm talking myself up.
Yeah.
But if you pay attention, if you're not doing that, you're talking yourself down and settling into this familiar place of this guy, Aziz, he's okay, I guess, but he's not that great. Yeah. And what a sad experience if that's your whole life. right? Your whole time here on this planet is you never quite made it, never quite enough. Yeah, sure, maybe you tricked some people into loving you and thinking you're good enough, I guess. But really, we all know that you're not.
Yeah.
I mean, and that doesn't change. It's not like, well, when you hit 30 or 40, or in my experience, if I achieve enough, or I have someone who loves me, or I earn something, or then it's going to switch and I'm going to really think I'm great and celebrate who I am. And it's not. You're going to run the same pattern that you ran before. And the pattern for me was, let me look through all the happenings of my day and my life and find the ways that I'm falling short and focus on those. And that's not being on your own side.
Yeah. I was just like zoning in on and this ties so beautifully with the niceness idea of feeling selfish when you are on your own side or when you say no. So what is that experience of, incongruence? It's like, okay, I said no, the universe has now conspired against me. Like I said something so atrocious, so bad that I deserve to be punished. And there's that self punishment that we inflict on ourselves, and all we might have done is say no to a dinner. It might not even be some massive request that you denied. And I have this role in college where I have to be on call for undergraduate matters sometimes, and oftentimes these can be in the dark of the night. And then there are some certain boundaries there that, after this time, I am not receiving that call. But, whenever I do get a call outside of those duty hours, there's always that guilt of saying no. I was like, no, this is not my time, because I know someone must be suffering, they need me. And when I do say no, then I am like, oops, it's like a selfish person. What is this idea of I don't want to be seen as selfish, or I don't want to be selfish?
Yeah. Well, it's both. We don't want to be seen as a variety of things because those are bad according to the cultural field. Selfish is right up there, but also arrogant, not caring, greedy, lazy, you name it, right? There's a bunch of things we don't want to be seen as. And we also don't want to be those things. Yeah. But there's kind of two tiers, right? One is, I don't want to be seen as that. I mean, ideally, I would not be that. But if I am that, I still also don't want to be seen as that. So I need to hide it, right? So we'll kind of take what we can get there. And, this is a lot of the new learning to free ourselves from the nice cage is exposure, right? Because if we're afraid to do the thing, all types of fear can only really diminish when we challenge that something terrible is going to happen or we're going to die if we do the scary thing. Yeah. So exposure is part of the freedom, but it's not the whole picture because the suffering is actually coming from, we can be continuing to enforce the cultural field on ourselves even as we're challenging it. And that's where you can get stuck in this pattern that's very painful. And usually what happens is people will lose the wind in their sails and eventually be like, all right, it's just too painful. I'm just going to go back to being nice and good the way I'm supposed to. And the problem there is there's these misunderstandings, these simplistic conclusions about humans and life that make it seem like the rules are very clear. Yeah. So actually talk about this. I'm very excited. This book is going to be coming out. I'm not sure when you're going to release this episode, but in December is, I happen to have it on my Less Nice, More You is coming out. And there is a section in there that was related to what we were just talking about. I'm trying to remember what it was. I lost it. Dang it. We were just talking about no, it's going to have to come back. What were we talking about?
Just this idea of feeling selfish and why does it sting so much that if you are selfish?
the nuance, that's what we were talking about, is the rules are so simplistic. And so in the section of the book, and these are actual sort of nuanced situations from clients, I changed the details and the names and stuff so it didn't have, so it doesn't reveal anything about anybody. But, you shouldn't say no to somebody because that's hurting their feelings, right? Or it's selfish to not pick up the phone.
Yeah.
And I would say, but what about if a situation where saying no, like if you were to say yes there, you would be in some way really having a negative impact on yourself.
Yeah.
So for example, there's a client who grew up in a certain religion where he was not to cut his hair. So now he's in his early 20s, and generally you don't cut your hair in this religion. And so he wants to cut his hair. He's not even sure how much he wants to follow all the tenets of this religion.
Yeah.
And his parents are going to be very sad and hurt.
Yeah.
So is it right to cut his hair or not?
Yeah.
And we really want to simplify things. We want to make it so, oh, just do this, just do that. And people do this all over the place, like not just with their own lives, but in the world. The problem with this is how Israel is, this is how Palestine is, this is how Russia is, like this is how it is. And it's like this really simplistic, there's no nuance to it. And I think humans like that because it gives them a sense of certainty. But it's, another example, there's a woman I worked with who, when she was younger, she didn't want to wear a hijab, the covering over her head. And it was less religious for her, more almost cultural. And so she didn't, and her dad especially was like, oh, this is so bad, but she was living in a different country, actually. At that point, she lived in the United States, which makes sense, in that cultural field that wasn't as common. She wanted to explore that. So, is she good or bad? Well, you could say, well, she was bad according to her parents, but it's good for her. And then, interestingly enough, so she lived in New York. She had kids. So this is when I met her. She already had her children. And she was with a man of the same religion, and they were kind of raising their kids. And she sort of got back in touch with her roots, and she wanted to wear the head covering now. And then her friends from New York that she met in her 20s, are like, some of them had upset about it. Like, oh, what are you doing? This is like oppressive to women, and, all these stories and ideas about it. And I was like, okay, so should she wear the head covering or not? And what I was trying to highlight with that section was the answer is, what does she want to do? Right. Because if she's looking outside of herself to say, is this good or bad? What do you think? Well, it's like, who do you ask? And at what time? And if you're looking outside of yourself to say, what do you think? What do you think? What you're going to get is going to be oppressive.
Right.
Because at first you might say, well, oh no, it was liberating. When my friends told me I didn't have to wear it, it was really great. Cool. But then what happens if it flips? What happens if you change? What happens if you no longer align with those friends? So the problem is not what you do or don't do. The problem is, are you looking outside of yourself?
Right.
And if you do, you're going to be oppressed or restricted. Now, I'm not saying you can't take in any input, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what am I going to be guided by? So there's a lot of nuance there. So example, if someone's calling you out of hours and they're like, help me. And the unnuanced, simple thing is like, you got to be there for people. You can't let people down, but there's nuance there. Have you, or maybe someone listening, have you ever experienced where you reach out to somebody or try to get something and you don't get it and it is painful? But then what happens next? Maybe you call someone else. Maybe you get more desperate and then more resourceful.
Right.
Maybe you find some solution, some self-reliance, or maybe get support from someone else or a stranger even. And then all of a sudden, wow, you're more empowered, or you realize that the world is there's more options in it. And so basically one simple upgrade for people who want to be less nice is to realize that I am not the source of everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And so if I'm unavailable, that person will find another option, another source for connection, for logistical support, for whatever it is that they're needing.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be the source for everybody.
Yeah. It ties very neatly into what I was going to ask about, which is over-responsibility. And so the example I have right now, and I was just looking at my own mind, and recently I've noticed that I was looking at the news a lot, and of course there's a lot of conflicts happening in the world right now, and I noticed that parts of me are almost taking responsibility for it in terms of, why am I not doing something? Or and there's a lack of acceptance that, I am just this small human being currently in the United Kingdom and really having no influence over any of these events. Uh, and it sounds like once I know what's happening, it doesn't even serve any purpose to watch that news again and again anyway. It just perhaps just um, puts me in a state of fear slash despair in my life, whereas there's a lack of boundary or a separation of what was happening. I framed it as my mental diet, and there is a time in which it was appropriate for me to know what is happening, but there is a time for me to also not know and stop watching what's happening. So I guess the larger question is, where do you think over responsibility fits in this whole picture, and why do we have this temptation to take on burdens, so to speak, of others?
Yeah, that is there's probably many answers to that.
Yeah.
So this is not the one.
Yeah.
And I do think that, well, one of it is that when it comes to over responsibility, paying attention to what's happening in the world and feeling pain about it, I feel like that's coming off of a pretty natural human impulse. Like if you were to be with your friends or your family, whoever's close to you in the world, you're kind of aware of what's happening for them. And I was away over this weekend for part of it, and I got home on Sunday, and my wife has been a little overextended, taking care of the kids, doing everything herself, and she was just kind of having a bit of a rough afternoon.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of it. I'm tracking it. I want to, is there anything I can do to help her feel better? Like it's a natural response.
Yeah.
The issue, though, is because now with technology, we have a very sort of strange extension of our senses.
Yeah.
So we're literally able to see suffering, which if you think about that before the visual news, I guess we could hear about it auditorily with radio, but even just a little bit before that, you could know that there was something happening and you could hear stories, and that would be the extent of it. But the stories would not be real time. You have to wait till someone comes home from the battle.
Right.
And who knows, they might even frame it in terms of glory or whatever the conquest was about. And there's so many nuances there. And now it's like, there's some interpretation if you're watching a news story, but sometimes it's just raw footage, of like, this is happening. You just like take it into your senses. You hear it, you see it, you see someone crying, you see a bomb, and it's like going to trigger a lot of that response that you would have for your closest circle. And so I think there's a nuance, there's a challenge. Now, nice people tend to have an overlap with sensitivity as well. So a lot of people that are nice tend to be more sensitive individuals, and what that means is you can have stronger sensory perception. You might be sensitive to sound, might be louder. Certain visual lighting might bother you more, as well as emotional. You feel upset more. That's why there's a rejection intolerance often. Is, wow, that rejection feels a lot worse, to either dish out or receive. And so the volume knob, you can think of it as turned up. So then if you watch a news story, someone else might be like, wow, I'm feeling stuff. And you're like, whoa, no, I'm like overwhelmed with how much I'm feeling. So that's where I think it is important to have boundaries and to study yourself and say, when does this become, dysfunctional or detrimental to me living whatever it is the ways that I can contribute in the world. And I think that nice people are prone to guilt in general. And so if there is suffering, and that could be in someone close to them or broader in the world, there's an idea that I am responsible to remove that suffering. And it's usually an unquestioned idea. And it's rooted in, well, it can go back to that sensitivity where I feel so much. I can feel your suffering so much that I can't feel good because there's this pain that I'm experiencing because you're feeling bad. So if you feel good,
Right.
now I can feel better. And that usually starts when we're young, because usually people as children will feel other people's and they'll become peacemakers of the family and stuff. So part of the shift as you get older, and for me, I spent a couple, handful of years there where I was like, oh, I need to like energetically not take that stuff on.
Right.
And I found that was pretty hard. And now what I do is, and when I say not take that on, is in if someone's feeling something, I wanted to not feel so much in myself. And I realized there's a way, I don't feel like I have a control over that dial.
Right.
But I do have a control over the responsibility dial. Because that's an idea. So when someone's around me, a client, someone in my life, my wife from just yesterday is suffering, I'll get a lot of information coming into my senses in the form of bodily sensations, emotion. And I just let it rip, like let it move through me. And I'll remind myself, okay, what if I'm not responsible to fix any of these feelings? And I just ask it like a question too, because you say, I'm not responsible for this. Now you're getting this inner tension because some part of you is like, yes, you are. It's like, what if I'm not? And then if I there's a lot of spaciousness around that. Or another way to say this is, what if this isn't mine to resolve? And then I just feel like, oh yeah, I can notice, oh, that person's really hurting. I can feel it. Yeah, sure. Just like a visual, I can see they're crying or something. I can feel in my senses what's happening for them. And then there's a lot of spaciousness around it. It does help me not carry it with me where I'm feeling it for the rest of the, day or week. Right. So there's a way that we can let things move, and then you could extend that to the world as well. Yeah. But I feel like with the world stuff, the diet you're talking about, the mental diet is important. I'm similar in that I can take in enough information to generally know what's happening. But, when it was and I made this mistake a number of times, but I remember when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started and Russia started to invade Ukraine. I mean, I was like watching footage of like refugees crossing a river, it was so intense. So I'm like, okay, I can know what's happening, but I don't know if I need to visually see. So I'm generally right now aware of what's happening in the conflict in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine. But again, I'm not going to go watch in-depth footage because even just thinking about that, I'm like, well, that's a lot of information to process. And then I'm going to be less available for my kids, for my wife, for my clients, for the work I want to create in the world, for the next book. And that's where I'm actually going to make a difference, because I'm personally not going to go fly to the Middle East and, fix up that conflict.
Right. Yeah. Big. And I think a lot of our responses are as if we could do that, right? There's that somewhat.
You should. If you're a responsible person, you should.
Yeah.
And then people have solutions that are like so stupidly simplistic too, right? Like, here's what you got to do.
Right.
Here's what they should do.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah. And do you have any tips on how does one deal with others being in that charged mode and wanting you to be charged? So it's not necessarily with respect to the current conflict, but it could just be an interpersonal relationship. And someone is so upset or charged and they want you to be upset or charged or have some reaction. And I'm not saying that I am advocating for being like a stone wall and just being a vegetable, but there is a certain line there, and there's a certain, I'm not the best functioning when I'm disturbed. So equanimity is the Buddhist word around it, which I quite like. So do you have any more on the practical side of if someone is sort of pulling you on the direction of being distressed to the point of being unstable? How do you say no to that? How do you set that invisible boundary there?
Yeah. This one's really interesting, and I've learned a lot actually having children around this one. And I think there was a period of time where I almost needed to use those moments as an opportunity for me to reinforce and express my beliefs. So if someone is talking about something really challenging, and they're talking about it like it's this terrible tragedy and it shouldn't have happened and stuff, there'd be like a subtle way where I'd want to communicate, I don't know, some like awakened spiritual idea. Like, how do you know if it's really bad? Is it good or bad?
Yeah.
Like, aren't these things natural? And I look back at that and I'm like, that probably was very annoying to talk to me.
Right.
And so having kids, kids will give you very real-time feedback, of what you're doing, if it's working or not. And so if you look at what's my intention here, this person is upset and they're my friend or my kid or my loved one, my parent, is my intention to kind of help them or support them or assert my viewpoint? And is my asserting my viewpoint going to be helpful here? So I think I got more and more clear of like, I can, for example, I have I think I thought about this a lot of like intentions of how I want to approach illness and death in myself and those that I love. And I have a tattoo on my arm about surrender to the divine, right? So I've obviously like got some ways that I want to approach it. And so I'm going to see it as a practice of surrendering when these things arise. Not everyone's going to have that.
Yeah.
And so when someone's sick or something and they're like, this person's so awful. And with my kids, I realize that it's actually, I can just go with them and I don't need to like have my own pride stance there. So for example, with my kids, they say something bad is happening. Like my brother did this and he took that and it's instead of being like, well, is it this or that? I'll just be like, oh, that's terrible. Oh man, I'm sorry. That sucks. That's awful. Right? I'm just going with that. And I used to be like, no, I can't say if it's awful because what if I don't think it's awful? And I just have softened around that. So if my mom's telling me a challenge that they have, I'll just be like, oh man, that's so annoying. Oh, that sucks. Right? Because that's just, and it's just an expression of energy and emotion and connection. And I don't need to say, well, in my life, here's how I would approach it. Because I realize, honestly, I have a part inside of me if I was in that situation who'd be like, this sucks, and equanimity is not, I don't have that part anymore because I'm so enlightened. It's, I'm aware of that part of me and its reactivity and I'm able to be with it and create space around it and also bring in another part. And so I've found that if I start with my kids, it's like, oh, that's so terrible. Then their nervous system relaxes. And this isn't just for kids. This is your friend who's upset about this or your parent or whatever. And then they just feel like, oh, you're with me. And now I don't, if they're like, isn't so-and-so so stupid? I don't necessarily have to go into all the story, but I just agree with like, oh yeah, that sounds so upsetting. Sounds so enraging.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm staying with them and their feeling and not going into all the nuance of their opinion about some situation.
Yeah, there's almost a hidden language that you're describing, which is that of feeling or nervous system. So what I was seeing you do was you're engaging with emotion directly as opposed to the content of what your son might be upset about. And I wonder if this is, to tie it back to what we were talking earlier, this is the education that's lacking, to speak this language of emotion, this language of how do we're always regulating each other's nervous system in any, like when you were describing this interaction with your kid, I was feeling my nervous system relax when you were saying, and I'm not even involved in that situation. So is that how you would put it in terms of like, is this language of feelings that we are lacking in society? And
100%. I think that's really well said. And there's I think it's most effective when it's covert or ninja.
Yeah.
So if you say, bust out your active listening skill, 101, and you say, so what I hear you saying is, or I'm going to be feeling empathy. So what you're feeling right now is, it seems like you're feeling angry, and that's a heck of a lot better than just getting sucked into the content and fighting, but it's still, it doesn't have as good as an effect as just really, and I think the block sometimes is like a pride position. Like, I'm not going to say it's upsetting because frankly, it's not. I think it's good that, parents, like they got a teenage kid. It's like, I think it's good that that other person broke up with him, because I don't think that he was good for her.
Yeah.
Right.
Could you say what
And
a
so,
pride position is? Could you quickly just
yeah, it's just when, well, it's in that case, it's just a few different definitions. In that case, I'm saying where we just we don't choose what is most effective. We choose to enforce our beliefs.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the expense of what would be most effective. So I've been saying all along that she shouldn't be dating him. This is a hypothetical. Right? I've been saying all along she shouldn't be dating him. It's basically I'm going to choose being right over what would actually be loving or effective here. Because if my ultimate goal was to guide I don't have a daughter, but in this example, guide my daughter to have a more loving relationship. That's what I want for her. That's what I say I want for her.
Yeah.
And so here why? Well, because I love her. Okay, so now she just got broken up with, and I'm gonna go, well, I told you so. I mean, the guy was a jerk. You're better off without him. That's more about me.
Yeah.
And needing to establish that I was right, rather than like, is that really gonna guide her to a better relationship? And versus in that moment, like, oh, honey, oh, that's so painful.
Yeah.
And so really it's getting outside of yourself and being able to see what's going to be most effective.
Yeah. 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 Somehow there's this this phrase, I'm always right, or she's always right, whichever way you use it. I think that captures this idea of having pride in your position.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something earlier which I wanted to briefly go into before we wrap, is this niceness stuff has a lot to do also not just with the mental but also with the physical. And you can talk about stress and you can talk about lethargy, but you've had some experience which probably go a bit beyond that. So could you describe, for those who don't know, your journey around physical pain and what relationship does niceness have with it?
Yes. Well, I personally started experiencing chronic back pain, but it wasn't limited to the back. It was like down my legs. So it would be something that might be diagnosed as sciatica, or called sciatica, where it's pain down the nerves of the legs, to the point where I was like not able to really walk very much for periods of time, certainly not play sports. And that started at the age of 15 for me. And so I had a long couple of decades of learning to work with physical pain. And like most people, when you get pain, the first response is like, oh my gosh, there's something broken in my body, and so we got x-rays and MRIs and, all that stuff at my age at 15 didn't show anything. Now, if someone has the pain start when they're in their 30s, those imaging studies are going to show, or the imaging results are going to show something. But in many cases, it's a red herring. The pain is not coming from those things. Those are called gray hairs of the spine. So the bulging discs, the pinched nerves, these things are, and the reason they know that is because there's a lot of research now that shows that if you take people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and give them these imaging studies, or do these imaging results, they also have those things, but they don't have pain.
Yeah.
So what's the source of the pain? And that became a study. I didn't know any of this stuff until I was about 30. So I'd had for 15 years. And the interesting thing about this pain is it moves. So in the literature around this, one person called it the symptom imperative, where the symptom's going to keep showing up in a very different place. So for me, that was the case. I got medications that sort of suppressed my immune system and some of the pain. But then I would get foot pain and wrist pain and jaw pain. And every single one of those times I would go to the medical facilities, I would get the diagnosis. You got plantar fasciitis in your foot. You got repetitive strain injury in your wrist. You have temporomandibular joint disorder in your jaw. You have migraine headaches. You have IBS for your stomach. And I had buckets of diagnoses, and it'd always be moving from one place to the other, and then I'd be engaged in treatments. And it was only in my 30s that I started to discover, actually, the source of this pain could be not originating in something physical in your body, but actually something in your mental and emotional and energetic system. So the pain is real. The gut spasms are real. The physiological downstream effects of spasms in the muscles or pain in your nerves, that's very real. It's just the source of it is not the shape of your spine, or whatever. The physical explanation is the source of it is your mind, your emotions. So then you start to say, well, what do you mean? What do you mean my mind and my emotions?
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest contributors to that is the pressure you put on yourself to be what you're supposed to be, the nice person. So you suppress a lot of emotion. If you're angry at someone, but you can't speak up about it, you suppress it. You hold it in. You might be aware of that you're holding it in, and you might not even be aware of it because you're so nice. You're like, I don't feel upset. And what happens though is that starts to accumulate, and there is an actual effect on your autonomic nervous system where it starts to cause. Now, in the short term, it might cause some of the symptoms I was describing.
Right.
I'm actually helping a client right now who has got IBS that's related to niceness, but it can also have long-term downstream effects in more severe illnesses that can take 2 decades to manifest. In fact, there's some interesting, I forget the name of the study, but there was a study that they took women, maybe it was everybody. They took everybody, I believe, and it was people in their 40s to their late 50s, and they looked at which of those people died from different illnesses, and all things being kept equal in terms of the population, the one variable they looked at was emotional suppression. They had them take like a rating scale to see if they had qualities of a lot of emotional suppression. And that one variable alone, I think it was like a 3x increase in their mortality. So it has these long-term downstream effects to suppress yourself. And if you think about it, it's not that far-fetched because there's a lot of fear in the nice person's day, right? You go into a conversation and someone, you're kind of like, what do they need from me? And if you were to say, oh, I'm not available for that, you're going to feel this onslaught of like fear or something bad's going to happen or guilt. And there's an intensity to that does start to create an effect on the nervous system and can create a wide variety, not only long-term health consequences, but in the short term, these symptoms that can be very painful. And then people can pursue long courses of discovery, of diagnoses, of treatments that don't actually address the underlying problem. So even if you solve the plantar fasciitis, guess what? You're going to get another symptom that can arise.
And just so that people don't mischaracterize what you were saying, you are not saying that you don't can you say something? It showed that you were yeah, okay, yeah, it showed that
Back?
somehow
Okay.
the mic, anyway, so it says that so you're not saying that don't take an MRI. You're not saying that don't investigate for any physical causes, or this is all just a hoax. That's not what you're saying. What you're saying is something along the lines of, if any of those things do not show a clear physical cause, then it is a possibility that niceness or emotional suppression or chronic fear might cause some physical symptoms, which might be super serious.
Yes. And I would take it one step further, that get the imaging done and just rule out very severe causes like a tumor or something that's a more acute issue. If you're in the middle zone where most people are, and you do go get imaging and they do give you a structural explanation for your pain, you got a bulging disc, we can go in there and cut it and fix it. I would slow down, and I think this is good advice for all medical situations, and get a second and a third opinion.
Sure.
From a broader net of physical health practitioners, and definitely look into the work of Dr. Howard Schubiner. He was the physician involved in something called the Boulder Back Pain Study, which was just done in 2021, I believe. And it was a randomized controlled trial, which is the gold standard for medical research. And they compared using what they call pain reprocessing therapy, which is saying that the pain is not necessarily from the structural, but it's from neural pathways. It's learned, and we're going to teach you how to unlearn it. And they contrasted that with back pain treatments as usual, medication, physical therapy, and the results were startling.
Sure.
I mean, it was often those approaches will sort of reduce pain some, but they had a large percentage. I believe it was about 70%, and this is just in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
70% of the people that they were treating with this approach didn't just have a slight reduction. They had like their pain was gone.
Right.
It went down to between I think a 0 and a 1 on a pain scale. And
Phenomenal.
this was just after 8 weeks. This was one of the first times that this has been studied like head to head, because before that they were like, oh, this is fringe stuff, this is just anecdotal, this is just happening in people's clinics, this is placebo or whatever. And this was like, hey, there's something to this. So again, everyone listening, you are 100% responsible, I think, for your own health and your health choices. And the problem though is sometimes we forget that and we just go to somebody and say, well, they said this, so I have to do that.
Right.
And I was like, whoa, no matter what they said, get another idea, get another opinion. There's also a beautiful resource called the TMS Wiki. That's the letter TMS Wiki, WIKI is in Wikipedia.
Right.
And that there's a list of practitioners and doctors and message board. And there's a wide world out there of liberation for a lot of health issues that you might think are chronic and lifelong, but actually can be resolved through a mental emotional approach, which is extraordinary and something I'm super passionate about.
Yeah, phenomenal. And it just is, you use the word startling, right? That's how you feel when you read studies like this. And I'm also very excited to see the studies grow with time, because as you said, you're right, there was this idea that this is all fringe. Even the simple idea that emotions can cause stress was at some point fringe, whereas at this point I think it's quite well accepted. Because I feel this is where we are going with the whole niceness, emotional suppression, I guess being the technical word. So yeah, I'm very keen to see what comes of it from a science perspective as well. Yeah. I just want to ask you a couple of generic questions and then we are done. The first one is, we talked a lot about niceness because I know that was like the demand, but your work largely falls into this bracket of confidence, is what you call it. So how does niceness differ from confidence? And to me, it sounds like a positive state. Like, not nice seems like an absence of something. So what is confidence?
That's a big question. I would say that there's a few different ways. I mean, it can be used in all kinds of different ways.
Right.
I think there is a type of confidence that comes from competence and knowing you can do something through repetition. So I feel confident I can fix the car. I feel confident I can give this presentation because you've fixed a lot of cars and you've given a lot of presentations.
Right.
So when a lot of people think about confidence, they think about you've done the thing a lot and you have confidence. And that is an important part of what I teach and help people with. A lot of people don't get the experience of doing those things because they're afraid. I don't want to give the presentation. What if I make a mistake? What if I look stupid? What if something bad happens? So they don't get the experience under their belt. And so they don't have that confidence that comes from competence. So what I am very fascinated by is, well, that inner confidence. Why aren't you going and getting that experience? What do you tell yourself if the presentation, quote, goes bad? How do you perceive other people in the room? How do you perceive yourself? And so that's the larger world of confidence, where I think all the levers really are.
Yeah.
For people that are stuck, if someone has no issue and they're like, I don't have much confidence, learning another language because I've never done it before. But they, they get a tutor and they get some app and they're like, oh yeah, this is fun. I'm learning. It's great. That's not the kind of person that I'm helping. It's someone who's got some story or block or limited identity that says you could never speak another language. You could never, and particularly to me, I'm most interested in this stuff. I mean, learn the confidence to speak another language is great, but I'm most interested in helping people with the things that are the most debilitating. So I can't have friends. I can't have the friends that I want. I can't have a relationship. I can't do work that's meaningful. I can't speak up. I can't be who I am. And that's the overlap, I think, between confidence and niceness, or a lack of niceness, is that the more confident you become, the more ideally authentic you are, the more you are able to be on your own side and to discover, well, instead of all these stories of what I can't do, who am I really? What do I want to create? What do I want to invest my energy into? And maybe that involves challenging the cultural field. Maybe that involves saying no to what a family member wants for me. So the more confidence we develop, the more we can really live our own life, which happens to be free from the cultural field, or at least you are steering, versus the nice person who is living a life that for somebody else, and being who they're supposed to be for that other somebody else.
Sure. Yeah. I'm going to avoid the temptation to dig deeper and ask you the second generic question, which is, what are some of the books that have shaped you the most? And if you have some book recommendations, if you would give to someone who's listening, who may want to improve their confidence or reduce their niceness, or perhaps just any book in general, like it doesn't have to be with these areas.
Yeah, well, I mean, definitely start with Not Nice, my book for niceness. But I would say books that have influenced me, I think, let me pull the ones that are going to be the most impactful. The one that's coming to my mind, which is a little more on the last topic, probably because just recency, we were just talking about it, is I would recommend a book called The Way Out by Alan Gordon. He was the co-leader of the pain reprocessing side of the Boulder back pain study. Sure. He was the guy who actually did all the therapy, and his practitioners, did it. So it's a fun, powerful, short, really interesting read. Yeah. The Way Out, I'd recommend that. And then in terms outside of the pain area, I think Dr. Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, is a really great look at niceness as well. I loved a book called Mind Over Medicine by Lisa Rankin. She was an MD who got really curious about this side of things too. Sure. So those books have really spoken to me. In terms of the more confidence realm, I think there was a great book by Stephen and McKay called Self-Esteem that I found really impactful, taught me a lot about shoulds and things like that. That was very helpful. I think Kristen Neff's book called Self-Compassion is a really great primer on that. There's a lot of good messages in there. Tara Brach has a book called Radical Acceptance that's very similar to Self-Compassion, but I think a lot of story, and she's just a great author. And then if you want to go old school OG, there's a psychoanalyst named Theodore Rubin who wrote a book called Compassion and Self-Hate, which was very powerful for me, and another book called The Angry Book, both of which I found really helpful. Yeah.
Thanks very much for those. I don't know if you know of this story, but there's this one time where I ordered a used book from Amazon by Theodore Rubin, and it came with like a signed copy of the author from way back when. I was just like, this must be like a blessing, that kind of thing. I agree with you. He's such a great author, and I could also probably see, I don't know if you're directly related to it, but perhaps on my own side has some. It looks like in the lineage of compassion and self-hate. Was that a direct inspiration?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my intention behind it's like, why write not nice if there's a big book out there called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover?
Yeah.
And I just realized, well, there's a way that I want to teach this that makes it really accessible. And I think part of my style is to use my own story and really take things that are maybe harder to understand and make them just really clear.
Yeah.
And I felt like, I mean, who's going to go read Self-Compassion and Self-Hate? It's like a kind of a dense, I like it, you like it, right? Because we nerd out on psychology, but so I was like, okay, we need something that's really, and same thing, honestly, I think there's such brilliance in IFS treatment, internal family systems therapies and stuff, but some of the literature and the books, even the ones that are meant for the public, are just thick, and I'm like, the average person is going to listen to the first chapter maybe and then put this thing down. So the goal behind On My Own Side was to take some of the teachings of Theodore Rubin, some of the teachings of IFS, and then my own experience, and make something that's just, as much of a page turner as a self-help book can be, but hopefully something that really moves someone emotionally to then hopefully wake up and say, wow, okay, let me use some of these tools that he's sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can definitely attest to the fact that they are page turners. And I've read, I guess, all your books. And I think you do a very good job of integrating the stories, but keeping that, like, it's therapeutic to read those. And you can feel the emotion come through it. I think there's more to it than just the content. And I guess you do a very good job of capturing that.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So final question, where can people find you?
Yes. Simplest would be draziz.com, draziz.com. There's a lot of links to free resources there. I have a free mini course that you can get on the website about unleashing your confidence, the 5 key steps that I would start with for everybody. But then also I have a link to my podcast there under resources. There's a tab. So I have a podcast to listen to. I have a YouTube channel as well with videos. So lots of, and links to my books too. So lots of materials you can get started with for free at draziz.com.
Awesome. And do you have a book coming up, did you say?
Yes. Less Nice, More You is going to be coming out in December of 2023. And that will be available Kindle, paperback, and then Audible as well. Great. So, and I read that one just like I read all my other books. So what I love about this one is it's short and sharp and designed to hopefully agitate you and inspire you to make a shift now, and then give you some really simple ground rules and ways to do that in a faster, more clear package. And then if you want the deep textbook study from Not Nice, you can do that too. But this one is designed to be more of a lightning bolt, which is why there's a lightning bolt on the cover.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Sounds great. All right, Dr. Aziz, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining me. And I'm very confident that people will not only enjoy listening to this, but also benefit a lot. And so thanks very much for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. That's what I'm here to do. So I appreciate the opportunity to spread the mission of mass liberation, because every single one of us, no matter, it's not, and I think people get hung up on like him and me versus you and this and that, and it's not me versus you. It's like us versus the doubt. And when we really see that we are, and that's this water bottle I have in the program that I run, it says, we defy doubt. We do the impossible. We are unstoppable. So I really do think that that's what I see us as. So anything I can do to help all of us in our real enemy, or the real challenge, which is that voice that says you can't and you're not enough and you're not worth it. And let's defy that and create beautiful lives. So thank you for the opportunity to share.
All right. Thank you very much. Hey, this is Sankalp. I hope you found this episode insightful, and I hope this interview shined some light on some of your niceness, and hope you will be able to take something away from this. If you like this podcast, if you like this interview, and you would like me to do more of this, then please subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this on Spotify or elsewhere, then follow the podcast and leave us a review. The best way to help this podcast, and as you know, this is completely ad-free and free indeed. It would mean the world to me if you could share this with someone who you think will benefit. Share this with the person who's always nice in your life and perhaps doesn't understand why that is a problem, or they understand it is a problem and not able to see how to improve it, how to correct for it. So leave us a review, follow, subscribe, all the good stuff. And yeah, hopefully more to come. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate you truly, and see you in the next episode.